Hello, welcome to Living Off the Grid in the City, the radio show. I'd like to discuss today a topic, and that is the topic of communications being off the grid. Welcome, today is the 13th of October, 2023. And to jump into my topic, communications or telecommunications as it is sometimes called, is paramount in our lives. It is important. It is just as important as many of the very basics that we can think of, like eating, like drinking, like breathing. Communication is as important as the stuff we do for our health and survival. We have survived as a species because of our capacity or ability to communicate with other humans, because we collaborate, because we act as groups and teams. We have been able to survive not only in modern times now, but also in our past. We hunted, we gathered with the use of communication. So it is no coincidence that we pay so much for communication. We're willing to pay so much. We are willing to sacrifice so much and go out of our way and basically work a very large percentage of our day so that we can pay for and have communications with other people, whether it's our family, whether it is friends or co-workers. Communication allows us to live a normal life, healthy life, and accomplish pretty much everything that we have accomplished as a humanity. Technological accomplishments, social, political, any kind of accomplishments we have done because of, in large part, because of communication. So today we have cell phones, we have telephones, we have the internet, we have all other kinds of forms of communication. We still have the mail, the written mail, not to mention the email, electronic mail. We have radio communications, we have communications through our television, through our now smart devices, phones, tablets, etc. So there are various types of communication. Visual communication is one of them, through art, through drawings, through writing. So it is a vast topic, a vast thing to talk about that I'm not going to get into with much detail. What I want to focus on is the communications that we can have while living off the grid. Yes, we are able to communicate, and not only through voice, person to person, but also through voice and video, remotely or long distance. We are able to freely, that means without payments, without being in a contract to pay month to month, we are able to communicate with other people through various means. Communication does not have to be paid, does not have to be limited and thwarted by a payment, by your ability to have money. Communication should not be limited or only kept to those or limited to those that have the means to pay for it. That is just a travesty. If you were to attempt such thing, that would be a crime to humanity. That would be a utter violation of someone's right to speak, communicate, right to speech. These rights that we in very many nations have enshrined for the freedom to communicate and openly speak are among the most important that we have come up with as societies, as a humanity, as a world, frankly. And we must protect that right, meaning that we should not limit it to monetary capabilities, monetary opportunities, to privileges of the monetary system. We should not limit anyone just because they cannot pay to communicate long distance, to communicate through electronic means, to use modern technology to communicate. Communication should be free. That is something I wholeheartedly believe in. It should be unlimited. It should be unrestrained. If you believe in such thing, then you should support communication that is off the grid. That means free of payments, free of being forced to be in any part of a network or group or company or having any kind of affiliation. You should be able to communicate independently and without any ties to any one company, government, or association or entity. You should be able to communicate with your grandmother, with your auntie, with your uncle, with your brother-in-law, sister-in-law, with your friends across a nation, across the world, without limitations of payments, without limitations of surveillance, of being tied to any one network or system. You should be able to establish a communication one-to-one at any moment that you wish to do so, and you are doing it without any criminal intent. So for that, you need certain technologies. These technologies are very much limited, very much controlled by multinational conglomerates, by governments, by companies and corporations. These networks and technologies are very much hoarded and limited for most of us. Most of us don't have access to telephone or cell phone communications without having to pay and identify ourselves as if we were criminals, as if we had the intent to do something wrong, and let alone, that's without mentioning your need to pay for such a service or such a capability. Without payments, without having to register and apply for a service, is pretty much unthinkable to communicate long distance. Even short distance, you have to have some kind of paid service, as far as I know, in most of the world today. So that should not be the case. You should be able to communicate, again, even across your town, across different states, across nations, frankly, free of charge. Unfortunately, that is not the case right now. However, there are options for people that wish to live off the grid or that are living off the grid to communicate, even long distance. Again, being away from the grid and without payment. Yes, these options are limited. These options are not mainstream. These options are not as reliable as your mainstream communication systems, but they can be very close or similar to those mainstream or conventional communication means. And they are your radio communication systems, mainly. There are others, but the ones that come to mind readily is the radio frequency or RF communication systems. There are many. This is a world on its own. These technologies are very old. They have been established for a very long time. These are the same technologies and systems that are used today for the most modern of communication systems that we have. The worldwide cellular phone communication system is based on this very technology of radio frequency or RF. Cell phone towers and cell phones themselves are nothing but radio transmitters and receivers. And there are radio technologies that you can have that do not require any payments, as far as monthly payments, as far as contract payments or prepaid monthly fees and payments, as your cell phone company has had you paying them for a long time. In fact, ever since they started, you've been paying for cell phone service. Before that, it was your telephone company. I mean, there's been a paid service pretty much ever since it started. Again, going to the telecommunications of radio frequency RF, that is a option that we have. You can purchase, acquire, or gain in any way that you can. You can be given these technologies. You can basically ask for these technologies and acquire them freely. You can get a radio set or radio equipment, whether it's a portable radio or what they call a home station radio set that can communicate from device to device, that is radio to radio, without the need of any in-between infrastructure like antennas, like satellites, etc., or wiring. You can communicate through the air using radio frequency, radio waves, from device to device free of charge. And that is one of the options that I am going to develop here soon. The other option is telecommunications by telephone, via voice telephone. Your normal voice telephone is a technology that doesn't really have to be paid. It is, of course, normally and conventionally part of a huge worldwide and national and local network of stations, data centers, wiring, substations, etc. that, of course, is controlled by mega corporations that are charging, that have it set up so you have to pay, have it locked up, secured, and watchdogged so that you have to pay to access their network, make calls, etc. But you can install a phone in your room, office, house, and install another phone in your mama's house, your brother-in-law's house, your sister-in-law's apartments, in anybody else's house. Run a wire, and you can call, and between the two homes, between the two locations, between the two phones, you can run a pair of wires and effectively have a telephone communication service between the two. Of course, there would be no dialing required. You just pick up the set. It's a direct line, sometimes called hotline, that you can pick up the set and directly speak to the other person. You can set it up, of course, with a bit of knowledge and some other equipment so that you can ring the other phone whenever you pick up the set. There are ways of doing that, which I'm not going to get into. That would take some time, but you can find out, and you effectively, if you do that, have your own private telephone network. Yes, it's a very simple, a two-phone network, but it is, in fact, a network. You can do that with a computer as well. You can communicate from computer to computer, free of charge, by making some basic connections, using some basic equipment, and voila, you have a computer-to-computer internet or network, network. Of course, again, you would need equipment, cards, boards on the computer installed so you can do such thing. But this communication between that computer and the other would be completely private, completely off the grid, completely free. So that's just to give you an idea that yes, you can communicate off the grid. It is not something that is unthinkable and a pipe dream. It does take knowledge, it does take development, it does take time and resources, it does take some tinkering with, trial and error, it does take equipment. That equipment may cost money. You may be able to find it free though. So this is just to let you know that we have options off the grid. However, the most popular option and probably the easier options to choose are your wireless options. They are going to require a lot less work. They are widely available, and these are your radio frequency or RF options or technologies. There are many. The most popular, I believe, right now is your ham radio equipment and technologies, amateur radio, VHF or very high frequency radio, or sometimes it's called FM amateur radio, since it's mostly transmitted, or that particular type is exclusively transmitted over FM or modulated frequency. And you have a lot of options with that. You have to, of course, acquire the equipment. The equipment may or may not be readily affordable. Some of the higher end, higher quality equipments, more advanced equipment, of course, is going to cost you more. But they do have some other equipment that is not as fancy, not as durable or quality, that could be acquired and that is quite affordable. That could get you started in the world of ham radio. There is a requirement for ham radio in this country, in the US, to have a license to operate. The license is quite simple to get, I believe. It requires nothing but an application and knowledge, a bit of knowledge. You have to study maybe for a week or so and take a test that basically covers etiquette, covers safety, covers what you should and should not do when using the ham radio frequency. It teaches you about frequencies, what they are, which frequency you are able to use. They have different types of licenses, different levels. So you're limited to a certain frequency depending on the level of license that you acquire. Of course, the lower level is going to have the most limited spectrum in the radio frequency, what they call band. So the more privilege, they call it privileges that you get, are basically they require a higher license level for ham radio. And after you get your license, after you get your equipment, you can or you may or may not join a club. There's advantages of joining a club, radio club, where you can, gain the knowledge, perhaps gain opportunities to gain the equipment, some guidance on how to use and deploy, install, and use the equipment. After you do all that, you can freely communicate with other radio operators that can also operate on the ham bands. And voila, there you go, free communication. When I say free, of course, there are resource requirements like everything else. There's really nothing that is completely free, but it's free of payments, free of money required that you have to dish out every month to a company, like your cell phone company or your phone company or your internet service provider, etc. So another option, without going into much detail on radio, that would take some time as well to describe everything about ham radio. So jumping over to the next most popular that I believe is for radio options is the CB radio, or Citizens Band radio. This is nothing but a frequency that is used. It is reserved for use for citizens here in the US, called the Citizens Band. This band has the advantage of being completely free of having to be licensed, and having to pay for it, of course, is free of charge to use. All you have to do is get the equipment. The equipment is more or less affordable, even much more affordable than your ham or amateur radio equipment, and you can freely use that. The equipment is limited to a low voltage, so it is completely safe to use as long as the equipment has not been tampered with. It is completely safe for use for most people, and you can use it to communicate to surprisingly long distances. You can communicate across your town, you can communicate even across state lines and even across nations. Again, through the air, completely wirelessly and free of charge. There is a lot of traffic on the CB radio bands since it's free. So also with that comes a little bit of unreliability as far as establishing communication with a certain location or, caller or radio operator. But it is definitely reliable enough, secure enough, and it is free. It is off the grid as well. You require no connection to any one network, any payments, any commitments. You require no infrastructure. It is completely the air. And just to go back to the ham radios, as far as range, the range is a bit more limited than CB. The ham radio frequency or radio communications are a bit more limited when it comes to radio, which is called simplex communications. That is having no antennas in between. Your communication range is limited by many factors, which I'm not going to really get into, but just to give an example, it is limited by objects, trees, even the curvature of the earth, because the communication waves travel in more or less a straight line. So you have to basically be within what they call line of sight of the radio or operator that you're trying to reach. Of course, there are many factors in between there, so the range could improve, even be more than the line of sight communications if you take into consideration other factors. But this could be basically canceled. This limitation could be canceled by the use of antenna repeaters, what they call repeaters. And these are nothing but antennas and equipment set up on antennas that repeats your transmission and basically relay it to the other radio receiver or operator. So you basically can extend your range by many, many miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, by using repeaters that are in relatively high positions, relatively high terrain. There are other ways to extend VHF or ham or amateur communications, which I'm not going to get into right now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please look for the next episode soon, and please ensure to share this with your friends and family. And please like this content and subscribe as a sign of support and for me to continue to provide this type of content to more people like you. Lastly, if you wish to support this content further, please visit the links provided in this publication. Thank you.